listening to the Straight to Video podcast with Rob Lane.
Hey, Rob Lane here, and welcome to another episode of my podcast, Straight to Video. What seems to be an endless well of treasure and amazing stories that is the Hollywood hard rock scene continues on today's episode with one of the most fun chats I've done. One where I just let the person off the leash to tell of their adventures in a time that for many of us as teenagers or young adults would only have dreamt of being a part of. On today's show, I check in with Black Star Riders bass player Robbie Crane. I seem to be ticking off each member of the Black Star Riders one after the next after chatting with Damon Johnson, followed by Ricky Warwick, and now Robbie is on the show. Like the previous two guests, Robbie shares his love of my local city, Nottingham, before diving into his incredible journey through the Hollywood hard rock scene. Now, Robbie didn't arrive on the Sunset Strip in the late 80s with dreams of being a star on MTV. This guy grew up right in the middle of it all and saw it all. Friends with most of the musicians that a lot of you know and love, Robbie was even out on the road as bass tech for Bobby Dall of Poison before that band were the megastars they became. Now, it would be 1992 that I became aware of this guy called Robbie Crane when he joined Vince Neil's solo band shortly after his departure from Motley Crue. Even now, I remember thinking how cool Vince's solo band looked and sounded, so to chat with Robbie and hear all the stories behind that was a real treat. And believe me, there are some good ones, and I'm sure a lot more he didn't share that some people will never get the chance to hear. Since being in Vince's band, Robbie has not taken his foot off the gas when it comes to being one of the most talented and in-demand rock bass players out there. He would go on to perform with Lynch Mob, over 15 years with RATT, Love 8, singer-songwriter Daniel Powter, and most recently since 2014 he has been part of Black Star Riders. Before we dive in, I want to give a shout and thank you to everyone over on the Straight to Video Patreon page for your continued support. If you're a regular listener who would like to get more involved with this show and become a patron too, which will give you behind the scenes access, early heads up on guests, a bonus podcast and exclusive merch, then simply check out patreon.com/STVpod. And also, if you're a lover of fine coffee with a rock and roll twist, then please visit our friends Dead Skull Coffee, who are a great independent coffee company based in the UK, who are offering listeners to this show a massive 15% discount on any order placed by simply adding the promo code STV on checkout over at their website, deadskullcoffee.co.uk. Alright, Robbie was a wonderful guest to chat to and made my job very easy indeed. He's right in the middle of filling in for his old pal Jerry Dixon of Warrant as they head out on the road to celebrate the 30th anniversary +1 because of the pandemic of their classic album Cherry Pie, so it was fun to hear about that too, along with many other parts of Robbie's Hollywood adventures. So I hope you enjoy my straight to video chat with Robbie Crane. How are we doing, sir?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm good, man. Good. We did it.
Yeah, sorry I'm late. It took me a second to kind of figure it out. I mean, I'm not the best at this stuff.
Me neither. Me neither.
How goes it?
I'm pretty good. How's things over there?
Good. Nice and, California hot. Look at my hair. I look like a cross between Glenn Danzig and the Creep Creeper right now. I'm just half awake, We've been just crazy out here. California's in the hundreds temperature-wise, Fahrenheit. And I don't know what that is Celsius, but it's hot.
I always go with Fahrenheit anyway, because 100 sounds like, yeah, it's fucking hot.
It's metal. It's more metal, bro. Hundreds. Where are you based out of?
I think you'll be happy to know I'm pretty much near Nottingham, which I think is a favorite of the Black Star Riders camp.
That's my second favorite place in the world. As a matter of fact, I've traveled everywhere, and every time we have a day off, I go, send me to Knott's. I know this sounds crazy. Most people go, really? You stay there? But I love the Premier Inn right at City Center. Hang out. It's got everything right there. I've got the Mogul down the road.
Exactly what Ricky said.
Yeah, you know what I mean? That's our hang. That's like our secret spot.
Not anymore.
Yeah. Doesn't matter where we are in Europe or anywhere in the UK or just wherever. Let's go to Knott's for the days off and just hang. So it's cool. Yeah, good for you. Awesome.
We actually met very briefly because I used to do a fanzine years ago.
Oh, cool.
Kerry Kelly did a lot of interviews and stuff. I think he invited me down to a Love 8 show when you guys were all doing that one time.
Yeah. With Chili Dave, Kerry, Jizzy and I, right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, that was a great lineup, dude.
Fun bunch of characters. We did other lineups. We had a fun one too with Matt Starr did one. Kerry Jerry and Matt and I dressed as, we walked by some shop in Cardiff and we saw these like costumes. They had these like bear costumes, and we bought these bear costumes, and Jizzy had no idea. He came straight from the hotel to the venue on the stage, and he comes out and the three of us are wearing these bear costumes, and we're like, playing Love Hate. And he's just like shaking his head like, jerks.
Wow. Because I would imagine Jizzy's pretty serious and like professional.
He wasn't happy, but it didn't affect our performance other than the fact that the venue was so hot and we were in these bear costumes. We're like, ah. So by the second song, I'm like, I have it like half off, and Nat's got his half off, and Kerry just wore it. He's going crazy. He's got the head on, and it was awesome.
I love that. You're just off for filling in for your old friend Jerry Dixon of Warrant. Firstly, how great does it feel to be out playing again? But also, can you let us know a little about how it is playing for those guys all these years later? Because you've known each other for a really long time.
Yeah, so I'm actually in the middle of it. They booked me out for the entire year, on and off. Jerry and I have been mates since we were like 14 years old. I mean, Jerry, I saw Jerry's band Risk, which was before Warrant. And, he was just good-looking killer Steve Harris style bass player, and I knew his girlfriend Gina, so we all went to see Jerry play when we were youngsters, and we became friends. We're about the same age, and we used to hang out all the time together. I was like his wingman, if you will, for many years, and I teched for Jerry for a little while. And my first gig, he loaned me a bunch of his gear, and I played the tuba. I was like 14 or 15, and so I've known Jerry and Eric, since I was a little kid. And so, through the years, we've always remained mates and whatever. And Eric and I were very close. So in 19, Jerry asked me to sub a show for him. And I subbed one show, and Kevin Baldus from Lit subbed the remainder. And so end of the pandemic, Jerry just reached out and said, hey, mate, if you're available, I have some stuff still going on. I think he's just so happened to be in the process of moving as everything started to come back. And he said, if I'm not ready to come back yet, we just sub for me. And I said, sure, man. So he was kind enough to, set me up for the remainder of the year. And he's fine. I talk to him every Monday. He also manages the band. So it's like I talk to him every Monday, get the expenses in and whatnot. And, the odd this and that. And he's awesome, man. He's doing great. He's in great spirits. He's just got a lot going on right now. And he's been doing it for 35 years in one band. I'm speculating, he's not said this to me, but I'm assuming he just, wants to enjoy a little bit of his life. Some people went into the pandemic full throttle, like Jerry and the Warrant guys, year round, every year, 35 years, nonstop. And you got that break. And it was like, a lot of my mates are like, God, I don't know what I want to do right now. I don't know if I want to go back to it, or I've managed to figure my life out now, and I'm doing something else, and I still love it and I'm passionate, but I just want to live my life a little bit more, or enjoy these parts of it, or finish enjoying it. I don't know. I don't know what his rationale is. He's not said to me, I've got a zit on my kneecap and I just can't fucking pop it. You know what I mean? He hasn't said anything to me. He's just said, hey man, will you sub for me? It's all good. So yeah, I've been happy to do it. The Warrant guys, I have history, as I said, with those guys. Janie and I knew each other very well. Always a massive fan of their songs and everything that they did as a band. And they played my high school talent show when I was in high school. Warrant played. And I was just teasing Eric about that the other day. I'm like, dude, remember you played my high school talent show? I grew up in Los Angeles and West Hollywood. So like in my neighborhood, the bands or the guitar players were like Saul Hudson, who later became Slash, and Mark Vachon, who does Mark Vachon clothing, and Dave Kushner, who later, joined Slash, and, Hillel Slovak, all the Chili Peppers. Like that was our neighborhood, that all those musicians, they were older than me, but we all grew up in that neighborhood. So it wasn't uncommon to have bands like, the Warrant guys, play our high school. Rami Jaffe from Foo Fighters was also in my high school class and all that. So like it was all musicians, we were all just dudes. Yeah, so we tease each other about that kind of stuff, dude, your band up from my band, when we were little kids. And so it was a natural progression to work with the Warrant guys after, all these years. And in that, I've known Steven since he was in, Janie and him were in Plain Jane, and Joey since he joined Warrant. So like we're all mates and we all get on good. And the crew are a bunch of great guys, the Graham family, Kip and Curtis and Tommy, they're great guys. And Kelly, the sound guy, worked with me in Lynch Mob. So it's like, I know all, we all have history. So for me to come into that camp, it was just very simple for me.
I would imagine those shows kind of run like clockwork now. It's just like a well-oiled machine.
They've got it down. I will say that. They've got their gear that comes with them everywhere in the US, and they've got like their own transportation. It's quite fancy, I might say. I've done it with other bands like RATT on a larger scale, but it's, there is the occasional haphazard thing that would happen, but these guys have it down. They're really got it down. And it's a good bunch of people and there's no drama. Everyone gets on really well. And yeah, like I said, I'm in the midst of it. And I have a show this weekend. And then the next week I have like 12-day run, and then into August and then all through August. And then we come into the end of the month of August where we come and play Stone Dead with Black Star Riders. So, you know what I mean? So there's like those little gaps in there. It's cool. Yeah.
You've touched on a few things already, but I'd love to learn and hear about your growing up, like right in the heart of Hollywood, because it's kind of a contrast to the story of the musician moving to Hollywood, getting off the bus, welcome to the jungle style.
Yeah.
But I think it's really cool for people like myself to hear these stories, because for us, it's such a million miles away. We only knew these bands from posters on our walls and in magazines. So
sure,
to know there's people who grew up around
from here. Yeah.
It's the norm. I spoke to Stephen McDonald from Red Cross, and he and his brother Jeff were the same, just Hollywood kids tasting it organically, like the punk clubs and all that kind of stuff. It's all they knew, and seeing all these bands in such early days, it's awesome. So you're originally from Orange County though, right? And moved to Hollywood when you was like, was it 9 or something, 9 years old?
Yeah. So I was born in the city of Orange, like right by the Circle. And then my parents migrated up to Los Angeles through some friends that we had met. Just by chance, my mom found this apartment in the midst of West Hollywood, like on Willoughby and Ogden, which was like right by Fairfax High School. I mean, like, Fairfax and Melrose area, right in the center of the whole West Hollywood music scene.
Is this late 70s?
Yeah, absolutely. 77, 78, like right in that era.
Right when Star Wars hit.
Exactly. And as a matter of fact, I saw Star Wars in Orange County with my cousin. And then we moved to Los Angeles not far after that. You know what I mean? And so I ended up in the middle of the scene, you know what I mean? All these rock musicians. I know this sounds crazy, but we would all be out on the street riding our skateboards, and we would see a version of Flea playing his trumpet walking down the street. And we thought, what's up with that guy on the trumpet? You know what I mean? And just a lot of musicians around. Everyone there was an arcade on the corner of Melrose, right across the street from Fairfax, Melrose and Ogden right there. And we would all hang out at the arcade, and everyone would have their guitars. This guy, Willie Conadu, they'd be playing Sabbath riffs. And I mean, so as kids, we were very much street kids. Everyone was below, we were very poor. There was nobody that had like money in our midst. We did what we had to do to get a quarter to play a video game or to buy a bowl of rice at Mama's, which was on the corner of a little Chinese restaurant. We just didn't have money. And so we were all out up to no good, and we would all sit and you either fell into the drug thing, or you fell into the gang thing, or you fell into the musician thing. And I was lucky to have kind of ridden the fence of the gang kind of musician thing, and never really got into drugs, although I sold them for a little while there. I think every 12-year-old had a half ounce of marijuana to sell in Hollywood. And, that's how we would buy our vans or our strings for our guitars. It was just how we grew up, and growing up in that scene was what it was. So I got really inspired by those, just being around the musicians and everybody. And it seemed like such a natural progression to go from, riding skateboards and dirt bikes and whatever in the neighborhood, like Saul Hudson or Slash, he was a dirt bike rider. He was on a BMX team. Although we couldn't afford bikes, I mean, we'd probably end up acquiring one, if you will, and, change a few parts around. It doesn't look like the same one it was, right? And so we'd have bikes, or skateboards. And it was a natural progression for us to just follow the older kids who became musicians. So like one of the first bands that I ever went and saw as a kid was Mark Vachon's band. He had this band called Mad Society with Louis Metz on bass and Stevie Metz, one of my great friends, as a singer. They were like a punk band, and we would go see them. They were our age or close to, and we were like, this is what we should do. Like, the girls love them. They're punk rock as heck, and everyone's digging it. And so, my mates my age, my friend Serge Shikarian, my friend Stuart Waldman, and my friend Sean Hashem, we all just put a band together, and we all played guitar. Stuart kind of sang, Sean played drums, and my dad had a bass. So I grabbed a bass. My dad was a bass player. And so ended up at Sean's house, and we would jam 1 or 2 songs that we could figure out. And that's how it kind of grew. And then, a version of that grew, and we would play the Troubadour when we were 14, 15 years old, and off we went. And that was really kind of like the natural progression. Never cover tunes, although we started playing cover tunes. I think it was like a Dio or a Rainbow song, and then like a local band song. And then we quite literally booked a gig without really having any songs. We just wrote them, we got a gig in a week. And so we just started writing original songs for whatever it was worth. And Joey from a band called Funhouse, who was also with Mark Vachon in that band later, was one of our guitar players in that original band that I was in, like the first band I was ever in. It was called Dream Suite. And we were awful. But intertwined with that whole time frame for me, I had started working with a local band that was coming in from Pennsylvania, and they were pretty big. They were headlining clubs, and it was a band called Poison.
Never heard of them.
Yeah. So I started teching for Bob from Poison, the bass player, when I was about 15.
How was that with like your age and clubs? Was there a club limit then for ages?
I mean, yeah, there was, but nobody ever said anything. I was always like, what's up? Because I knew everybody. I mean, I was the kid outside the Rainbow with my skateboard. What's up, Blackie Lawless? What's up, dude? You know what I mean? Tommy Lee, dude. I mean, me and my gang of friends, and when I say gang, there was 20 of us, you know, we were a pretty formidable street urchin bunch. Because we were quite literally street kids, you know what I mean? We would go out in a group and we were a pretty motley crew, if you will. We would just go out to the clubs and we kind of knew everybody. So I never really had any problems. And we would go and I went to the Starwood and actually saw Motley Crue and Snow and those bands. Because one of the guys that was the door guy at the Starwood lived in our apartment building. And my dad would go, hey, you know, Robert wants to go see this band. Mike, can you hook him up? I'd be, oh, yeah. You know, I'd be this little kid. I couldn't see above the crowd very well, but I would be 12 years old, 11 years old, and, you know, watching some of these bands. You know, growing up in Hollywood at that time, like I said, it was just such a natural progression. The Poison story, why I brought that up in my first gig at the Troubadour, was they were kind enough to say, hey, we're going to come down and see you play in your first band. You know, so I was like, oh, cool. Well, the Poison guys were coming down. It was a Thursday night or Wednesday night at the Troubadour. And all my friends from school and my family and everybody were lined up. And we're all going, you know, they're all coming in. And the Poison guys, all four of them, come walking down the street like a gang. I swear to God, my parents were like, wow. And they came up and they're like, hey, can we introduce you? And I was like, yeah, that'd be great. And so they go up on the stage and they literally put our instruments on and they play Talk Dirty to Me and they introduce our band. We come up and we sucked. But that was the introduction to my first band playing live at the Troubadour. You know, it was pretty cool. And, you know, I've remained friends with those guys, you know, throughout the years, and Brett and Ricky and Bob and Cece, and they're all really good guys. And to me, they're the same guys I met when I was a youngster. Like I see Brett to this day, and no matter, you know, what TV show or what he's up to, he's just the nicest, most normal, just like we were when we were youngsters, you know, in Disneyland, chasing, you know, girls around or whatever we were doing when we were young.
Superb, dude.
Yeah. So growing up in that time and in that snapshot of that genre of music was really cool, especially for a 14, 15-year-old kid. I was very impressionable, just excited to be a part of anything music, you know, all things music. And that's why you'll hear a lot of stories of me teching for people, because I think when we're all kids, we ended up at someone's garage or someone's basement watching their friend play. Although I was never in a band at the time, you just want to be around it. And you just, wow, you just sit there. It just so happens that the first band I went into their garage was Warrant, and the second band was Poison. And so I ended up working with these bands that later became iconic bands of the era, you know what I mean? And later going on tour with Poison when I was 16, 17, 18, in that time frame.
Is that just as you'd left high school then?
No. You have to realize at the time, Poison didn't get signed until 86 and I graduated in 87. So the first tour I did with them, I mean, when I say we toured, we would do weekends, you know, so it didn't interfere with school at all. And then my first tour, which was the Loudness Cinderella Poison tour, was summer of 86. So when all my mates went, oh, we're going to go to the beach this summer, I was like, I'm going on the road, you know what I mean? And we had a tour bus and like my dad drove me to the bus and it was like, have fun, son, you know, and I was like, yeah, you know, that was back in the 80s when summer was 4 months almost, you know, 3.5, 4 months.
Yeah.
So I went out on tour and I was.
Wow.
Yeah. And so.
How was you when you came back?
Well, I mean, I was ruined before I even started, right? I mean, I was ruined when I was 12 or 13. I mean, you know, growing up in Hollywood, again, that whole thing of growing up in that scene and being around musicians, and it just seems so common, you know what I mean? We all go and work at the plant and we all get promoted and we all become the general manager, or you know what I mean? That was just the natural progression. In our neighborhood, it was like you went and sold drugs and bought a new car, or you went and joined a band and got a record deal and became famous. It sounds kind of weird, but the mentality was almost like, you know, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, that's going to happen. It just seemed so common to us because we've seen so many of our mates do it. We watched the RATT guys go do it, watch the Motley Crue guys go and do it. You know what I mean?
Just a matter of time.
Just a matter of time. That was the mindset or the thinking. The reality was like 1.1.11110% of that group maybe got a record deal. And then of that percentage, even a finer amount became famous and made a living at it. And so here I am all these years later. I've had a great run of gigs and played with some really great people, and very blessed and very thankful that I was able to and have been able to perpetuate this career playing music. You know, I have a wonderful family and a great wife who I met in 1994. And people are like, wow, you've been with your wife that long? I'm like, yeah, man, we've known each other since 94. We've been married since 2001, but we've lived together since 97. And it's just like, I believe that strong foundation that I didn't have as a kid, and nothing on my parents, just like all the Hollywood parents, they were just trying to make a living and working 12 hours a day and, you know, 6 days a week. They were never around. That left us up to our own vice, you know.
And you had some distractions being in Hollywood. It wasn't like you was just in suburbia with just...
Wasn't uncommon for me at 13 to be gone for 4 days and come home and what's up? And my mom and dad be like, oh, where were you at? Oh, I got stuck in Malibu with these chicks and, you know, whatever. You know what I mean? It was just very common, you know what I mean? And yeah, it was definitely a child. People are like, you should write a book, but I say, I have kids now, so I don't think I should write a book because I would have to be honest. It's not that I would say anything bad, but just my experiences are so outlandish, you know what I mean? And some people go, wait a minute. I'm like, I can only tell you what I experienced. And so-and-so was there and you can ask them. And then they're like, oh yeah. And you're like, you know, there it is. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's interesting.
Did you see kind of like a transition in the scene then, being there from like the late 70s and getting into it around early 80s? And obviously then the Poison and RATT thing started to explode. Did you see that transition? Was you listening to different kind of music before then, or did your taste change at all?
It's kind of weird because they say that things come from LA or from New York so much earlier, years before they reach the world, middle America or the world. And so like the glam thing, Hanoi Rocks and Poison and all that, that was like 82, 83, 84 for us. So when Motley Crue did Smoking in the Boys Room, which was, by the way, Poison's closing song years before that. I'm not saying anything about Motley Crue. I'm just saying that was what Poison used to close with. That era of music, I mean, Motley Crue were the forerunners, the front runners to bring everything, motorcycles, glam, metal, all of that in our genre to the world. Nicky's one of the most creative. I'm a massive fan of Motley Crue. I mean, that was like my Hollywood Led Zeppelin. I remember when Nicky bought his black Corvette and we would all, as kids, we would all just, oh, you drive by Nicky. And you would just see the top of his, he had his hair kind of, the tips were kind of blonded at the time. And you would just see the top of his Corvette tops were off and just the windows were up to here. And he would be like, you know what? And we were kids, you know what I mean? And I saw them at the US Festival. I loved Motley Crue. That was inspiring to us because we saw these guys on the strip, just normal dudes. And then Shout at the Devil was out. And I mean, I got in trouble in 9th grade for having a cassette of Shout at the Devil in my, waistband. And I'm listening to it in math class and the teacher, kicked me out. And I'm like, I'm listening to Motley, fuck you, you know what I mean? Or whatever. That era of music was what was going on in our neighborhood at the time. You know what I mean? And that's kind of really the reality, is that was what was going on in our neighborhood. Being around all of that and seeing all of that just changed you as a person. That scene, for me at least, just my observation, I think like up to 87, it was killer. From 77 to 87 was like so fruitful. And it seemed like 86 and once Guns N' Roses played once the Ritz video came out, Guns N' Roses 87, Saturday night concert on MTV, it was like the day before every singer and rock musician I knew had spandex and they looked like Bret Michaels, you know what I mean? Or David Lee Roth. Next day, man, everyone's voices dropped to like this. And they had the glasses and the bandana and, on their head, very soft-spoken, and they talk like that. And it was like they were Axl Rose Juniors. And I was kind of chuckling, like, dude, what happened to you? Like, you must have seen that. And mind you, I mean, Guns N' Roses was 2 years before for us. So like they had a demo that circulated, had Jumping Jack Flash on it. It had Don't Cry. It had Welcome to the Jungle. It had My Way. We all had this cassette. It made its way around Hollywood, 86, 87, like before they ever were like massive. So we had all heard the entire thing. We got it. And the funnier thing is my sister Paula went to school with Slash at Bancroft and at Fairfax. And so my sister and her husband started a printing company. They did my band's flyers. It said Print on Third on the bottom. And Slash came up to me and was like, oh, dude, who does your flyers? I said, Paula, my sister. He's, oh, cool. So he called my sister. And my sister did all the Guns N' Roses flyers for all that era. So like the spaghetti incident, all that stuff. So when she would do the flyers, my brother-in-law would go, man, what's up with Saul? Like, they barely ever could pay for their flyers. And I said to him, and you can ask him this, that guy's going to be the biggest guitar player in the world one day. You watch. And he's just like shaking his head at me. To this day, he goes, do you remember when you told me that? I'm like, yeah, I'm telling you. Those guys just had that special thing about them. They're just great. They were the quintessential. I think that band more than anybody captured my neighborhood. Steven, I've known Steven, and I've never really, I knew Slash, like, hey, how you doing? I saw Titus Sloan and his, earlier bands. I was really good friends with his bass player, Ron Schneider. He passed. He's a great guy. But Steven and I, knew each other forever. I was friends with Steven Adler more than I was friends with any of them. I'd known Steven since I was 12 years old. You kind of always knew that they were going to do their thing. Like Steven used to lug this drum set. He had this double bass, 4 rack toms, 2 floor toms. He would lug this drum set down. If you knew this Pan Pacific Park off of Gardner there, it was like a valley, and he'd lug them down and he would set his drums up and deep down there playing these drums, and we'd all ride our skateboards. Yeah, Steven, it was crazy. And you think about, that time as kids, I don't know, 12 or 13 at the time. And he would just be out there playing drums. Yeah, I love playing drums. He just loved it. The energy flying off the guy was massive. And that smile on his face when you see those early Guns N' Roses, that was real, man. You know, he's a real cool cat. He's got a great energy about him and sweetheart. And I just played with him a while ago, and he still plays fantastic. And he has that swing.
That's what everybody says.
It's unbelievable. It really is that swing and tempo of that record. And you just feel it when you play one of those songs with him. You're like, there it is. He's like Charlie Watts. You know what I mean? He just got that feel. And so, yeah. That first GNR record, for me anyways, really captured that mid to late, and I say late, I mean up to 87-ish LA vibe. And I think that a lot of the bands after that, and it's no slag on them, I love some of those bands. Some of those bands are great friends of mine. I love the records, and I absolutely have the utmost respect for them. And it's not on them. I think the labels and the industry kind of started to regurgitate or find their next Guns N' Roses, their next Poison, their next, they didn't do any of those bands justice by marketing them the way they did. Because some of those bands, like a Cinderella, who I love the first couple of records of that band. I love all the records and they're my mates. And they were on that first tour that I did. It was, like I said, Loud Does Poison, Cinderella. And that was their first tour as well. But there was so much more than that genre to me, because Tom Keefer's writing it, Eric and Fred and Jeff, they had so much more to offer. And they just got so pigeonholed in that thing that they were more than that, in my opinion. They did well, but I think they could have been a pretty big band, you know what I mean? And bigger than they probably were allowed to become as per the industry. But, there were a lot of bands that happened to. So for me, in the Hollywood scene, regarding specifically the Strip, people don't really talk about Melrose all that much and how it affected everybody. Melrose for a time, Crescent Heights all the way down to La Brea in the 70s, especially the late punk rock days, Flips of Hollywood, everyone would go to Flips and buy clothes, and all of the shops up in Renee's Records, Aaron's Records. I mean, those were places that like we all would go to, and just like that was where all the bands would hang. Not a lot of people talk about that. We'd go to Fred Siegel and we walk and look at the clothes we couldn't buy because we couldn't afford them, but we would get inspiration from that, and we would go home and we'd take our shirts and cut them up and make them into, emulated as we could from that era. So a lot of that, no one really talks about the Melrose scene that really inspired, Tammy down from Faster Pussycat. He worked at Retail Slut. We'd all go down and see Tammy. What's up, Tammy? And he'd be like, what up? And there was a recording studio called Music Grinder right there between Gardner and I guess Poinsettia. And it was a famous recording studio. That's where Poison recorded their first record. I know RATT recorded a record there. I mean, that's not there anymore, but Antonio's Mexican food restaurant that Manny owns. I mean, it's all of these places that we just grew up hanging out on that strip. Again, that arcade on the corner of Ogden and Melrose, Mama's, the Chinese restaurant. I mean, everybody would go there. You'd see everybody in there. Everybody who later became, whether it was Anthony and Flea and Hillel and Jack, they would all be in. I mean, we'd see those guys in there all the time. And it was just a common thing because we were little kids and that was what we all hung out and did. Yeah, it's a lot of people don't talk about the Melrose scene, but all of that kind of died. Not died, but it just became kind of a emulation of what it was. A lot of people saw the decline of Western civilization, the metal years. They all came to Los Angeles. They all were like, oh, I'm going to be somebody. They read the Platinum Rainbow. They were like, I need to act this certain way. And you're like, they came in, butch from fucking middle of nowhere, and they left busy from, damn Yankees or whatever. Yeah, I like damn Yankees, but you know what I mean? They were just like, hey, Butch. No, it's not Butch anymore, man. It's Daz. You're like, oh, sorry, Daz. It just kind of became an emulation of what had already happened. And that's why it died out. A lot of people say that the grunge thing killed the 80s. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think the industry just shoved so much of the same thing down our throat. They stuffed that 10 pounds of crap in a 2-pound bag and they just burst, and people were sick of it. And I thought the change more happened, obviously with Appetite for Destruction. I thought Skid Row's first record really opened a lot of eyes to kids like me who were kind of sick of the whole scene. Like I think my, Wasp, RATT, Motley Crue, I might have bought one or two other records, but after those bands' records, first two or, second records came out, I stopped getting into that scene, started getting into the Chili Peppers more, loved Guns N' Roses. When that first Skid Row record came out, I went, there you go. That's a cool new band headed in a kick-ass direction. They were kind of Guns N' Roses, but they were just a little bit more focused musically. I mean, I think Appetite for Destruction is an awesome snapshot of what was going on in Hollywood at the time. But, none of us in that bubble in Hollywood really knew what was going on in New York at the time. And I thought Skid Row was that Guns N' Roses snapshot of what was going on the East Coast. And it was like, that's cool, man. I mean, when that record came out, we were sold. I remember my guitar player, Steve Gaynor, and I were in the car coming back from Tower Records. He had just got this new truck or whatever, and we were driving. KLOS goes, it's like the new band. And they played this song that we literally stopped in the middle of the street, pulled over, listened to it, turned back around and went to Tower Records and bought their record. And it was Alice in Chains, Man in the Box. We were like, who in the heck is this? This is cool. Went back, bought the record. I actually have you bought like the first 1,000 and you got a VHS video cassette of them live at the Moore Theater. And we played it and we were like, dude, these guys are the next thing. I mean, Alice in Chains. So those three bands for me, Guns N' Roses, Skid Row, Alice in Chains, I thought just kind of changed the landscape and made you say, okay, some of these bands are cool. And I still love the Poison guys and I loved what Motley was doing. I mean, Feel Good came out. It fit right in with the Guns N' Roses record, the Skid Row record, the Alice in Chains record. I thought that Dr. Feel Good was right there with it. I thought it was strong and powerful, great songs, heavy, had everything. And I thought it was killer. So I think those four records, I should say, really started to change that landscape. Yeah, Nirvana came out, Soundgarden came out, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains was bigger. But I think that those bands' music kind of set the bar a little higher for some of the bands that were just that were punting instead of running it all the way in. You know what I mean? It really raised the bar. And I think a lot of bands got lazy, man. I mean, you listen to some of those later bands, I'm not going to name who they are, that, even I played in, that their records just got lazy as the time went on. And the clothes became the same and they were all wearing the same clothing designer. And it was just a regurgitation of a lot of the same stuff. So I don't blame it on grunge. I think it was just like every genre, new generation of kids has their favorite bands. And those bands weren't putting out quality material to put themselves in a position to win those new fans. And here comes these new bands. That's why Motley survived later. Alice in Chains took, the reins. Guns N' Roses survived. Skid Row survived. Slave to the Grind came out. I thought that was just like a capitalization on what they had already started. And it was a movement, you know what I mean? And I thought it was in a positive direction. A lot of my 80s friends will slag me for it and tell me I'm a jerk and I should shut my mouth because I don't know any better. But, I am what I am.
But like you say, that when you heard Alice in Chains, it was like, holy shit, what is this? And you wouldn't have been hearing it as like, this is a whole new movement. It's just a great original sounding rock band.
Yeah, honest.
I think it was more like the industry kind of shut down. The old Seattle thing was a breath of fresh air, perhaps for even younger people. It's like, oh, wow, this is our new rock and roll. This is our thing, what they could grasp hold of. So I think there was room for a lot of people, but it's just kind of strange how the whole industry kind of chucked away that Hollywood thing for a while. It's like, no, we're not bothered with that anymore.
Yeah, and through that all, and we all know this now in hindsight, but through the entire thing became this massive pulse that on the top was all this, all these bands, Motley, RATT, all these bands in the 80s, and then into the 90s, Skid Row, Guns N' Roses, whatever, was this pulse building of this movement. And me as a kid, the second band I was in was called Panic. It was two of the players from the original band I was in, and it was a full-on speed metal band, full Metallica, Slayer, just all those bands, Armored Saint, and we were into all those bands. So through that was that groundswell of that speed metal and metal scene. Anthrax, all those bands were kind of getting fatter. There's Metal Massacre 2 had come out, I think in 81 or 82, and we all had that. And we were totally in that early version of Metallica with Mustaine on it. I think Four Horsemen was on that. And we were like Lizzie Borden, all these bands, there was like this groundswell that was kind of happening underneath that in Hollywood. And so, you had Metallica come out with Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning, which I went and saw at the Hollywood Palladium, stood right in front of the cliff, total fan. Friend of ours, his dad owned the parking lot, and he's like, I think I can get you guys in. So we're like, okay, cool. There was two of us, and we're like, cool, man, we'll meet you at the parking lot. So we get there, and there's 10 of us. He's like, I can't get you 10. And it's like 2 p.m. I can't get 10 of you, and my dad's gonna come. So we all like went into the sound check. And we were like watching Metallica sound check, and we're like, what's up, Lars? And they were cool. They were like, hey, man, what's up? We were just these kids, I'm 15 or 16. So we saw that show. And I thought that show for me as a kid, it invigorated me as a musician. It made me say, man, I really want to do this. This is my dream. This is what I really think. I've got something I can focus on. And, I don't think a lot of people know this about me. I never drank. I came from a family of, alcoholics or whatever. And I just never found it fit to drink. I was used to tell myself, my friends would be like, yeah, dude, Southern Comfort, let's all get drunk. And I would be like, when I've got something to party about, then I'll party. Right now, I don't. I haven't achieved what I got to party about yet. And they were like, oh, So I just waited till I was like, I think I was 21 when I first, 20 or 21, right in that era when I first started drinking. That was the other thing about me. A lot of people don't realize that. I was focused and driven. And, I was poor. Dude, I was hand to mouth. I would live on people's couches. I would, eat what I could eat. You know what I mean? And so I had that desire and that drive to try to achieve and to try to get myself out of that hole, if you will. You know what I mean? So that was like, I was really hyper focused as a kid. So I think that Metallica era and that groundswell of music on top of what was going on, I'm talking solely from LA, you know what I mean? The LA perspective really was inspiring and kind of pushing us forward. Ride the Lightning to me was like the quintessential metal record for me. I mean, I love Kill 'Em All. I love Master of Puppets. Rhodes and unfortunately Cliff passed. And I thought, Justice for All was great. But to me, Ride the Lightning was like that quintessential record. As a 10th grader, I was like, yes, I could put it on front to back. And it spoke to me. It invigorated me. I would ride my skateboard or my motorcycle or whatever I rode. I would always have a headset on, just be so inspired by that record. And later it became Vulgar Display of Power. When I was playing with Vince Neil, I would run on the treadmill and listen. We were out with Van Halen and I would be like, fuck, Vulgar Display of Power, dude. Yes. Cowboys from Hell. I just love those records too. I always loved that style of music. I never played in a band other than Panic that was that style of band. But to this day, been driven. As a matter of fact, my daughter's boyfriend, who's 17, we're in the car, lives out in Malibu, we're driving him home. He's like, yeah, I'm listening to this band. I don't know if you know who they are. They're pretty cool. And he puts on Cowboys from Hell. And I'm like, singing every word. And he's laughing at me. I'm like, I know, here I am, 52 in the backseat of my daughter's car, listening to her boyfriend, listening to Vulgar Display of Power or, Cowboys from Hell. And I'm like, yes. You know what I mean?
I love that
for the youth, and I thought that those bands and that movement and that era really inspired what came. And then just so happens, Nirvana puts a commercial record out that everyone loves because nobody bought Bleach, but everybody bought Nevermind. You know what I mean? Soundgarden came out with, Bad Motorfinger. A lot of that just, I was inspired by all of that music.
The 90s come around, and this is when I first became aware of you here in the UK because of your association with Vince Neil.
Yeah.
There seems to be a lot of moving parts with this story, what with you originally being the guitarist. But weren't you also the person to break the news to the Vince camp that MTV were covering the story, that he was no longer in Motley Crue?
Yeah, well, that's my impression. So what happened was, back up a little bit, I was playing in a band with a guy named Rick Monroe, who I'm still great friends with to this day. And Rick's girlfriend was Vince Neil's wife's sister. So they were kind of like Charisse Neil and Shanae Riddell were sisters. And so Charisse is married to Vince. And so Rick and Vince would hang out all the time. So I met Vince through Rick. And I met him loosely, like, hey, how you doing? He was cool, whatever. But Charisse and Shanae had a younger brother named Gary. And he was friends with Rick too. And Gary and I became great friends. So we hung like Eric Turner from Warrant, Gary, and this guy, Sean Crosby, and I. The four of us were like, this is later. This is 91, 92. Yeah, if you saw the four of us coming, it was like, put your girlfriends and daughters away because we were trouble. So I met Gary, and through Gary, got acquainted with the Vince camp. I had auditioned for Lynch Mob at that point. Dana Strum from Slaughter had sent me out. The stories of Dana Strum are very true. He got Randy Rhoads into Ozzy. He got Jakey Lee into Ozzy. He always had his ear to the ground for all the musicians. And the band I was in at the time, a band called New Haven, consisted of myself, a few other players, and Tim Kelly was our guitar player. So Dana saw us showcase for Chrysalis, and he was like, band's terrible. Guitar player's great, bass player's cool. They took our guitar player into Slaughter, and Mark and Dana would send me out on auditions all the time. And so one of them was for Lynch Mob. So I had played with an early version of Lynch Mob in the demo stages, but I was not nearly good enough as a player. So I didn't get the gig. Played with them for 6 months, but didn't get the gig. So I come back to LA because they were in Arizona, and I really started practicing bass guitar, like seriously got into it. I was like, I'm never going to not get a gig again.
Right.
I'm going to be ready. And so Gary had introduced me to Vince and everybody, and Gary lived with Vince at his house up in the hills up over here. And so one day I'm sitting watching MTV and, at my house, and they're like, breaking news, lead singer for Motley Crue has left Motley Crue to go be a race car driver. And I was like, what? Because I knew Vince and Gary were going to the races. Vince had bought a race car team. They were doing the thing. I was like, wow. So I call Gary. I go, hey, dude, the MTV just announced that Vince left Motley Crue. And he's like, what? He goes, hang on a second, dude. Hey, Vince, come here. And Vince comes over and they put me on speakerphone. He goes, tell Vince again. I go, dude, they just said on MTV that you're leaving to be a race car driver in Motley Crue. He goes, what? He goes, we'll call you back. And that was what happened. That's a true story. And was I the first person to tell him? He seemed pretty surprised.
Wow.
You know what I mean? I don't know if it was or it wasn't. So that's what happened. So fast forward, this is 92. So this is February of 92, February of 92. And then he had this new manager, Bruce Bird, sent him with the Damn Yankees guys. They wrote You're Invited, Big Frank Can Come. He comes back. Gary calls me and says, hey, dude, Vince is shooting a video down at the Van Nuys Airport. Do you want to be in the video? And I go, yeah. He goes, well, bring your guitar. And I was like, cool, man, I'll come down. He gives me the address. And I'm thinking like I'm going to be in the crowd. Like, yeah, I don't know if it's like the AC/DC video where the whole crowd's got guitars. So I bring my bass down. And mind you, Vince would say hi to me and I would be at his pool and he would just kind of look at me like, that dude doing at my pool. You know what I mean? I would be like petrified with the, hey man, and Eric and Gary and I would be at the pool. And so I went down to the video shoot, and Vince is in his white Testarossa, and he's like doing donuts on the tarmac at the airport, and he pulls up, and I'm in this white piece of junk Toyota pickup truck, and I, pull up, and he's like, hey, dude. I get out, and he's like, hey, man. And I've got my bass, and he's like, is that your guitar? And I'm like, yeah, it's my bass. Oh, come on in. We walk into the dressing area, and I see Vic Fox, beautiful as ever could be. And I see Phil Soussan. Phil's got a bass on, and I'm like, oh, cool, man. Phil Soussan's in the video. And he's like, yeah, dude, is that your guitar? And I go, oh, it's my bass. He's a bass? You don't play guitar? I go, oh, because my dad was a musician. My grandfather was a musician. They both played guitar and piano and keyboards. My dad played bass. And so my dad made me learn guitar first. Was I a guitar player? Absolutely not. I'd never played in a band ever in my whole life, but I could play guitar. And I knew a few Motley Crue songs because I loved Motley Crue. So I go, yeah, I don't really have a guitar. I have a bass. He goes, oh, don't worry about it. Gibson sent me all these guitars. So there's all these guitars. He goes, pick a guitar. His wife goes, oh, this one look good. I just red one. So Sharice, picks this red guitar, and I put it on. I'm like, oh my God, I guess I'm play guitar. What am I? And they're like, yeah, so you're going to be in the video playing guitar. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to be in the band. So cool. I literally sat there and learned the song right there on guitar.
I was going to say that. What was the situation? I wondered if there was like, you had to learn the song, or there was like, oh, it's going to be moving so fast, just pretend no one will ever pay that much attention.
Oh yeah, no. No one said to me, you got to learn the song. Just by chance. So in the video, it's Vic Fox on drums, Phil Soussan on bass, and the guitar player was this guy named Mickey Lords, who was in a band called the Glamour Punks. They were a pretty cool punk band, rock band from Hollywood at the time. He was dating Sinead Riddell by this time. She was like, my boyfriend's going to be the guitar player. So he was learning the song too, right there. So I just sat there with him and learned it really fast. So we were the two guitar players. So if you see that You're Invited But Your Friend Can't Come video, Sharice gave me clothes and they dressed us, and I'm in that video playing guitar.
It's crazy because that was like a massive budget video, which you couldn't escape on MTV. And
oh, yeah.
But like the whole organization of it just seems so like wafer thin.
Oh, well, no. It was well put together, but I just think it was very last minute.
Okay, last minute then.
In hindsight, it didn't matter who was up there on stage with Vince. It didn't, not in that video, because it was quite literally his first video, of just him. It was about him. It wasn't really, everyone else were just kind of like scenery in the background. And that's quite literally what we are in the video.
Everyone was rocking out though. I noticed you guys and all that. I was like, this band looks fucking cool.
Yeah. And so I'm on stage right in the video, which is, camera left. So we shoot the video, I'm like, wow, he gave me like $900 to be in the video. And I was like, I'd never even had $9, much less $900. I was like, yes. So I was like, stoked. But mind you, I had hung out with those guys, Gary and we'd go out and Vince would be there, but he was never like, hey, dude. He was always just like, oh, hey, man. I was Gary's friend. I knew my place. How's that? And so I went from Entourage member number 60 to Entourage member number 5. You know what I mean? So we do the video. We go back, everything's fine. The next couple of times I'm at the pool, hanging out at Vince's pool with Eric and Gary and me and Sean and Phil Soussan or whoever. I was a little bit more connected. And so he comes out, it's like end of May. He's like, yeah, man, fucking MTV just asked me to do the MTV Movie Awards in June. I got to find a guitar player, man. And I'm like, I was kind of sitting there and Phil and him were talking about guitar players. And I kind of go, well, if it's not live and it's, it's just to tape, I'd be happy to do it. I just kind of said that. And I thought to myself, like, what are you saying? And I swear to God, him and Vince and Phil look at me like, Vince goes, dude, you're already in the band, dude. He's like, you're the guitar player. And we're going to get another guitar player. It's going to be like AC/DC. And I was like,
wow.
I go, I am? He goes, yeah, dude. He goes, we got a lot to do. He goes, come on. And so in Vince's house, he had this office, like when you walked into his house, his massive house, you walked into his house, there was his office was like this center room. And you would just kind of walk by it. And when you look in there, he had these two, nowadays, it's not PC, but back then it was cool. He had these white elephant chairs carved out of elephant tusks. And they were massive, but they were beautiful, white, very ornate chairs. And we were never allowed to go in there and sit on them or touch them, you know what I mean? So he goes, come on in. So I come in and he goes, dude, grab an elephant. Dude, grab an elephant. So I like sit in his elephant chair and he goes, we've got a lot to do, man. I need you to get your stuff together and to get focused. So he writes me this check. And mind you, I have my piece of shit truck parked out in front of him. So he made me park down the street because they didn't want me to embarrass him with my junky truck. He gives me this check and he folds it and he goes, get yourself together. So I'm like, oh, wow. And so I look at the check and it's $5,000. And I was like, $5,000. Oh my God. So I'm like, dude, I don't have a bank account. I'm going to go call my dad. And I'm going to figure this out. And can I use your phone? And I call my dad. Dad, Vince gave me this check and I got to open a bank account. And my dad's like, cool, man. So I drive my truck down and meet my dad at the bank. And I'm like, open this bank account. I give my dad the check. My dad's like, okay, gives it to the guy. And it's like the movie The Jerk. Jerk. If you ever seen the movie The Jerk, gives him the check and I signed the back of it. I go, my dad goes, you got to put the majority, just $2,500 into checking and the rest into savings. And I go, yeah. So he goes, okay, you need to sign this $2,500 into checking. I'm like, okay, 25. And he goes, okay, and 47,500 into savings. I'm like, what? And it's like, it's $50,000. I go, oh, this is a mistake. Oh my God, I got to call Gary. So I call the house and Vince answers. He's like, hello? I go, Vince, it's Robbie. There's a problem with the check. And he's like, oh, what's wrong with the check? I go, dude, it's for 50,000. I think you meant to make it for 5,000. He goes, 5,000? What are you going to do with that?
Wow, man.
Because you need to get your stuff together. Give me 50 grand right out of the gate. Boom. I went from 0 to 100 in 2 minutes. And I was like, wow. So that's why you'll always, yeah, what a story, huh? So that's why I tell people this all the time. Like, I don't care what, happens with Vince. Vince is a very wonderful person. Quite literally gave me the shirt off his back when I was a young kid. And I will forever be grateful to him for that. He was a very good person and still is. And I have the utmost respect for him. And, we all go through things in our life that are dodgy or whatever, but he's a great guy. And we had the best times together. So a couple of days later, we're talking about guitar players. And now I'm involved and it's me, him, and Phil talking about guitar players. They have Warren DeMartini come down and meets at Vince's house. Him and Vince didn't really connect in that manner, although, Warren's great. A couple other guys were talked about, but Billy Idol calls him and says, I've got the guy for you. It's this guy, Steve Stevens. Vince was like, dude, Steve Stevens. And we were like, yeah, that guy's great. Swear to God, the next day, Vince goes, we have rehearsal tomorrow at Third Encore. And I'm like, okay, I don't even have a guitar. You know what I mean? I don't even own a guitar. So I borrow my friend Johnny that owns the company Copy Case. Johnny loaned me his amp. He loaned me his guitar. He loaned me everything for that first week of rehearsals. I show up the next day and it looked like Steve Stevens lived there. Like we walked in, it was like cases and guitars and massive racks of amplifiers. He had flown in the day before from New York. His tech was there and we all come in, we're all just dressed in our shorts and, at Vince's full clothes. And Steve is like dressed like he's custom made.
I knew you was going to say that.
Ray brown leather pants and custom made shirt and custom made shoes and his hair. I mean, it looks straight out of the video. We're like, wow, like this guy's killer, right? And he's insanely great and he's really loud. And the guitar is just killer. It was everything that you wanted, that quintessential badass rock and roll guitar player. And I was like, holy shit, I've never played guitar in a band live in my whole life. And here I am, right, with these guys. The con's almost up, man. You know what I mean? I'm about to get busted right now. I was like 22 and Vic's all enough's enough, big records, Phil, Ozzy, all the big records, Steve Stevens, Vince Neil, and me. You know what I mean? This like, hey, dude. So this is funny. So, Steve's like, playing all these killer solos and we're like, wow, this guy's pretty awesome. And I'm like, you know what I mean? And yeah. So Vince goes, yeah, man, what do you guys want to jam? And he's like, you guys know any Motley Crue songs? And Steve is like, no, not really. And Vic's like, I do. And Phil's like, yeah, I swear to God, I just go, we just start playing. So I knew all these Motley Crue songs. So the first rehearsal, I was kind of like, here I am, right?
You got it off the ground.
Yeah. And the truth is that I wasn't great, but I was serviceable. I mean, maybe Steve could tell you later. I think that Steve was just kind of like, who's this guy? I didn't know at the time. He'd never played with a guitar player before. And here we are. So we just jammed the first day. And then the next 2 days or 3 days, we played You're Invited because we had to play it live for the MTV Movie Awards. Or live to tape. And so that was kind of our focus. So we did the 2 rehearsals. Then we went to Sony in Burbank on the soundstage and we did a day of rehearsal and then the shoot day. There were all these other bands and groups on there. One of them was that band In Vogue. So we shoot it. And if you watch the video, I mean, I'm quite literate. Like the guitar I'm playing, Steve, like when I walked in, he had this Gretsch Duo Jet sitting on a stand. And in hindsight, I thought it was very smart what he did. He was kind of like, put the guitar there, didn't say anything about it. And I was like, wow, man, cool guitar. He's like, yeah, you like it? Why don't you play it? His goal was to get me to play that guitar. Then he wanted me to play a Duo Jet. And it was great. He never pushed it on me. It was there if I wanted to play it. And I just loved the guitar. So I play that guitar. It's his guitar. And I play on the MTV Movie Awards. But Steve was live. Vince was live. And that was it. Everyone else was taped. So I wasn't pressured to play, perfect. Just look cool. So, I mean, if you watch that MTV Movie Awards, that's the second time that I've ever played guitar on stage, but in front of an audience, first time ever. And it was a massive audience. Arnold Schwarzenegger was right in front of me. It was like all these famous people right in front of me. And I'm like just up there rocking and my shirt comes off and I'm like, oh, my shirt came off. I was all, oh, my shirt's coming off. And I'm just like, oh, just keep playing. And so that is like this surreal moment I could see it right now. And if you watch the video, I'm like, the song ends. I'm like, now what do I do? And I look at the other guys, they all take the guitars off. So I take my guitar off. I'm like, okay, I'll follow what they do. So it's just very like comedy of errors, just following the leader, And so right after that, I ended up that night with one of the girls from In Vogue hanging out, and Eddie Murphy walks over in front of my parents, everybody. He's like, hey man, why don't you introduce me to the girls? And I'm like, dude, you're Eddie Murphy. What are you, drunk? Hey, this is In Vogue, Eddie Murphy. It was a very surreal evening. Steve came over to me and said, hey man, mind you, this whole massive life-changing event's happening. My parents are there. And I'm like, yeah, this is killer. I can't believe I'm here. And this is amazing. And my buddy Todd Chase from Tough was there. I don't know why he was there, but he was there when we were all hanging out. And Stevens comes over to me and goes, hey dude, let's bail this place. Let's go eat dinner at La Dome. I want to talk to you. You want me to leave the greatest moment of my life? This is the greatest thing that's ever happened. And so it's like one of those crossroads in life, in my opinion. Do I go with Steve and hang out and form a relationship and possibly some camaraderie, or do I stay here and hang out and act like an idiot? So I went with Steve. We went to La Dome and we had dinner and we hung out and we bonded that night. And I think that night kind of solidified our relationship as friends. And he lived next door to me in the apartments that Vince had rented. And I drove him crazy because I didn't want to lose the gig. And so I'd play guitar 24 hours a day. With any music I could find, I would put it on. I would learn the guitar and he would knock on the wall and go, dude, shut up.
Was you straight with him then on where you come from and what your background was?
No, because no one ever asked. No one ever said, listen, here's the truth. Vince put me on a salary. He gave me all this money. In my heart and my mind, I was like, I'm not going to keep this gig. I'd already lost the Lynch Mob gig. So in my heart and mind, I was prepared mentally for them to go, it's not going to happen, dude. The jig's up. And apparently behind the scenes, there was a lot of talk. Phil, the bass player, they were like, this guy's not. Come on, we need to get another name in here. And Vince stood up for me. In all fairness, Vince was like, no, I like that he's not some guy. And I like that he's a little loose. And I think he's cool looking and he's a cool guy and he's a part of the family. And Charisse and Gary stood up for me too. And so I had the whole Riddell camp and Vince kind of in my pocket. So it made me look a little more powerful amongst the other guys, Steve and Vic and Phil, than I really was. But to them, they were like, oh, he's got some power. He's got like family behind him. You know what I mean? And in hindsight, I didn't have anybody. I didn't know. I could feel it a little bit, but I would just come in every day and keep my head down and work really hard, as I always have. So we get into the demos, which I didn't play on because I was a guitar player and no one was going to play on Steve Stevens demos. And I was just happy to be there. Want me to carry a guitar? Want me to hang out? Need a ride? You know what I mean? I was just there. And so didn't play on the demos. And then we got to the record and Steve just told me, he goes, you're not going to play on the record because, you're not going to play on the record. It's my record and I'm the guitar player, but you might play a part or two. So I think there was a time Ron Nevison and Steve had me in on guitar to kind of fiddle around on, and they kind of thought it was cute. I think it was on Fine Fine Wine or something that I strummed some guitar. I don't think my tracks actually made it, but they had me in there. And then toward the end of the record, I guess this is about December or January of 92 going into 93, Steve, we would always ride together to the studio. He's like, hey man, what do you think of the bass on the record? And I go, oh, I don't know. And he's like, yeah, man, it's just not quite moving me. He's like, turn the car. This is like at 12 at night. Turn the car around. Let's go back to the studio. So we go back and Andy Udoff's there and Steve gets the bass and he plays bass on a couple of songs. And I'm like, that's cool. That part, wow, that's really cool. It was just stylistically a little bit different than what Phil was doing. And there's nothing on Phil. The bass that's on the record, is a fitting for the record. And that's Steve Stevens on the bass. And mind you, Steve and I were the guitar players. And so Steve played the bass on the record. And then my initiation into the band was to tell Phil that he was fired. So I had to I had to tell Phil, which sucked. And Phil took it for, as best I guess you could take. He just bought a house. It was a pretty big blow at the time. And Phil and I are mates. I love Phil, but I get why they wanted to do something different. I also think that Phil was also a little strong. He had written most of those songs in the beginning, like the earlier versions of the songs. And then Steve came in and shaped the songs and added his parts in. And so, so we're both the guitar players. And then we auditioned bass players after Phil was out of the band. So we had like Pete Comita come down. We had like probably 6 different bass players come down and play with us.
Was you itching at that point?
No.
No?
Quite the opposite. I bought all this guitar gear and I was in my head, I'm the guitar player now. I'm the rhythm guitar player, is what it is. I dig it. I liked it by this point. I was like, this is cool, man. It's not as much pressure on me. I'm just playing guitar. I was just happy to be there. Like, I didn't care. So we used to do like these. So we were in Studio A at Rumbo, which was where Guns N' Roses recorded Appetite for Destruction in Studio B. So we had Studio B. It's like our rehearsal room where they recorded. And so we would jam and I would play bass. Steve started going, hey, man, you got to play bass pretty good. I'm like, well, dude, I was a bass player. He was like, what? I go, yeah, I've never played guitar my whole life. He's like, you never told me that. I was like, yeah. And he's like, oh, you play bass pretty good. So we did some bonus tracks on that record, which was Sedated and Blondes Have More Fun. So I played bass on those. That's me playing bass on those. So that's where the bass by Steve Stevens and Robbie Crane comes in. I played those last 2 tracks. So I'm on the record. Mind you, I play bass on that, but I'm still the guitar player. We're looking for a bass player actively. Finally, we get the Van Halen tour and we have to go into rehearsal. And Steve goes, dude, you're going to be the bass player. So I was bummed, to be honest with you. I was like, oh, really? Like, I don't really want to play bass. So if that solidified me being in the band, fine. So then we got my mate in the band, Dave Marshall, for the tour, and off we went, right? We did the photo shoot, and that's how I ended up in that band. I ended up, of the original band, being the longest tenured player in the original band. I was the last guy to leave the band. And that's, my own loyalty, again, to Vince. He did so much for me, and I was very appreciative, you know what I mean? But I was out of Vince's band in 96 for like 2 weeks. And then I was in a band called Vertex with Steve Piercy and Al Petrelli, and through Larry Moran got me in that gig. And then from that, I joined RATT. So I was not out of a gig for long. So from like 92 all the way to now, I mean, I've been pretty consistent, which is a blessing.
How did the whole Daniel Powter thing come around?
Again, Larry Moran. I was playing in Lynch Mob. I had left Lynch Mob. I'd done a country music awards with some country gigs and all the late night shows with an actor named Christian Chenoweth through Brent Woods. He was the MD. And then Larry called me and said, hey, there's this gig, pop gig that I think you'd be good for. And so I came down to the auditions, and it was a Barry Squire, Barry Squire. He does the band building. He gets musicians for famous artists. It was his whole band, and he was his bass player. And the bass player went on to play with Macy Gray, and they needed a bass player, and they had another guy in mind, and they were just going to be nice to the management, which was Union Entertainment, who managed RATT and Larry, and just let their rock bass player come in and play. Well, I came in and I played, and the drummer, Paul Allen, and I, we grooved really well together. And the artist, Daniel, was like, yeah, you don't look the part, but you play really well with him. I think you'd be the guy. So I just ended up in that band. And I don't think the MD, and I'm cool with them now, but I don't think the MD and the other players were very happy about it initially. They were like, really? This guy's a rock guy. He's not a pop guy. He's not, but the gig didn't really call for that. Yeah. So I played with Daniel for, I think it was like 12, 13, 14, 2.5 years. We went all around the world. We went to China, Russia, all through the Asian rim, all through Europe.
Was that a whole different kind of experience and vibe for you? Not just the music, but the way that thing operated?
Yeah. Younger musicians, different era, very serious. I loved playing with Chris Raitt and Ben Hazlitt, 2 guitar players. Adam Perry, fantastic musician, fantastic keyboard player, just like an all-around amazing musician, producer. Paul Allen, again, the drummer, just fantastic musicians, great people. Daniel is by far one of the most talented musicians I've ever met. Really knows his music, and a just talented piano player and songwriter. Wonderful person, really treated us very well. Yeah, it was a cool experience. You're just working for an artist. It's all the same. Just how you handle yourself, how you go about it, your approach. I always try to be as amenable to every situation I'm in, you know what I mean? And a lot of guys come into it with like, you're getting me. And I'm like, look, I'm here for you. What can I do to make it better? You know what I mean? You want me to sing that part? Cool. You don't want me to sing that part? Great. You want me to play this differently? Great. I have no airs about the way I approach a situation. Every situation is like that. And I think my childhood, moving around so much as a kid, meeting so many different people in different contexts and different things, lent itself to me joining these different situations and coming in and just being open and willing and connecting as quickly as I can. And not intentionally, just naturally,
I don't know if you consider yourself a hired gun or...
Just a player, man. Just a player.
I've asked a few people, how long does it take you to figure out a band dynamic if you're like a piece that's come into an already established act? Does it take you long to figure out the personalities and stuff?
I don't think I come into it that way. And I think that might be the secret. I don't think I come into it going, what's he about? What's he about? I just come into it being myself and just being who I am. And then eventually those relationships either groove or they don't. I can't tell you how many times where I just not gotten along with certain people. And it's cordial, but it's not. I had that relationship with a few of the guys in RATT, and I was in that band for 16 years. And in the end, I'm not friends with them anymore, simply because I wasn't friends with them before. And the only reason why we were in each other's lives is because we played in that band together. A few of the guys, I absolutely talk to all the time, and I love them. And we're very close. Stephen Piercy is one of those people that I just love. He's just one of my favorite people in the world. We have the same sense of humor in a lot of ways. And he brought me into that band. He absolutely brought me into that band. My relationship with Bobby Blotzer has always been up and down, but we've always been very close, and I love him. He's my bro. He is who he is, and he gets the rap he gets because, maybe how he handles himself with some people. I don't know. With me, we get on great. We have a good laugh every couple of days, and it's all good. I tried to go into every situation and just be myself. I'm not going to say it would be pretentious of me to come in and go, okay, how can I squirrel my way into getting in everyone's good graces? I don't think that's natural. You know what I mean? I just think you just be who you are. And if people accept you, then they do. And so same thing with like the Warrant situation, yeah, I've known those guys for a long time, but I haven't been around Eric in years. And we're mates, and we reach out and we see each other, and it's all, fond memories and everything's cool. But, you go into a situation, a working situation that is a football team, it's everyone is like, and you don't come into it and kind of lollygag. You quite literally get thrown out on the pitch in the last 2 minutes and you got to win the game. You know what I mean? You've got to have camaraderie and be a moving part. That goes back to my work ethic. And I think I've touched on this with a lot of other musicians and stuff. I try to come in full speed, like ready to go, hit the ground running 100 miles an hour alongside them. I try to have the vocals and music and endings and everything. I mean, a lot of gigs, as a matter of fact, the first Warrant gig I ever did in 2019, I didn't rehearse. I just showed up, played the gig, no rehearsal, and just got up and played endings, vocals, stage, everything. Because if you hire me, I'm going to give you 100%. I'm not here to mess around. Same thing with Black Star Riders. When I auditioned for Black Star Riders, I didn't think I got the gig, but I tried to hit the ground running. And culturally, you have to understand this. My career had existed solely of playing with people in my backyard. All of the musicians were from LA or from Hollywood. We had the same experiences. We had the same likes, dislikes. It was just, where I grew up. But in Black Star Riders, it was a completely culturally different thing. And I kind of met Jimmy DeGrasso. I played with him once before. I met Damon through Kerry Kelly, and I didn't know anybody else. I knew who they were. I loved the Almighty, and I thought Ricky was awesome. I remember the first time I went down to meet them. They were out with Skid Row in 2014 in America, and they were playing a couple hours south of where I live here. And I drove down to meet them, and I walked in the bus, and I met Adam and Ace and Jimmy before I even walked on the bus. And then I walk on the bus and Ricky's there with his family. And he's like, hey man, I'm like, hey, Ricky, nice to meet you, and see Damon, and we shake hands and we go to the back lounge, and Marco takes me in the back, and Scott Gorham comes in, and I'm waiting for this big English accent. And he comes in, and he's like, hey man, you look like Marco's grandson. And we start laughing. I go, dude, where are you from? Aren't you Irish or English? He goes, no, man, I'm from Glendale. I was like, what? He's like, the Glendale gunslinger? I'm like, I didn't even yeah, Glendale. Oh, duh. You know what I mean? I just didn't realize he wasn't English or Irish. So it was, that's how I met the Black Star Rider guys. And I went on the road with them for a week. I thought it was great. Ace and Adam put it together to where I could come out, travel with them to get to know each other for the last week of the tour with Marco. So I toured with them with Marco, and it was awesome to watch Marco in context. So I get to see the band.
I mean, that surely doesn't happen much, that transition period. That's cool.
Yeah. And it was just a testament to how the Black Star Rider camp is and how cool Marco is. And it was a very amicable split, I would imagine, at the time. Yeah. I feel so connected to the Black Star Rider camp and to everything that we're doing and have done over the years. I mean, we're just such good friends. And even the guys that have left the band, we're all still cool on. I just talked to Jimmy the other day. Damon, is like my brother. I love Damon. That's a relationship that I feel very close to and that I hope to always have. He's a talented guy, and I love him. And yeah, and I love that he's doing his own thing. I mean, when I first joined the band, I was like, man, like, you're Damon Johnson, dude, like Brother Kane, wow. You need to be doing that some more, man, and it's great to see him out there doing his thing. And I think his records are fantastic and his band's amazing. Doing great. I'm very proud of him.
Awesome, man. So kind of in closing, you've played with so many different musicians over the years. Is there anybody who's you'd still love to jam with or play in a band with?
All of them.
Or anybody on the Hollywood scene who you knew from all this time, but you've never had the opportunity to jam with?
Jam with all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have. I've at least had a jam with every single one of them.
There's some photos on your Facebook with Billy Idol, right?
I jammed with Billy the first time with Steve Stevens at a club in Hollywood. We were all out drunk one night and we ended up on stage together for a song or two. And then Brian Tishy played with Billy, with Steve and them for a while. And Brian had him down to one of our jam band. We used to have this jam band, Robin McCauley, Chris Slade, and Brent Woods, and Teddy Zigzag, and John Corabi, and a bunch of people. We'd have people sit in, and Billy was one of them one time, and it was awesome. So yeah, I've jammed with him a few times. I jammed with Eddie Van Halen when we were on tour with him in '93. We went to the Limelight and we jammed.
How did you and Mike get along on that tour?
Mike Anthony is one of my all-time hero bass players. For every Hollywood kid, he was wonderful to me. He was amazing, and he still is to this day. I see him, and he's awesome. I have a bunch of his old cases that Van Halen cases. So like, if you ever see me roll into a gig with my gear, all of my cases are our old Van Halen cases because Kevin and Mike, they would get rid of stuff out of their locker. I was like, if you ever sell anything, let me know. I want to buy it. So I bought tons of cases from them. And because he's so much stuff. I mean, he just is like, what's he going to do with all that stuff? So I have a lot of it. Man, Mike Anthony was like so cool to me. The first tour that was the first big tour as a player I ever did was with Van Halen in 93. And he was wonderful to me. And Vince used to say, he would announce the band guys, Steve Stevens on guitar and, Big Fox. And when he would introduce me, he'd go, and on bass guitar, Robbie Crane. He would do this thing, Robbie Crane, right? So Mike Anthony would come to the side of the stage and be like, Robbie Crane. And he's got that high voice. So every time he sees me, he goes, Robbie Crane. Still to this day, he does it. And it's just funny. And yeah, man, the Van Halen guys were wonderful to me. I mean, Edward was wonderful, gave me a bass and a guitar and some shoes. But Mike, I always felt like, and it's not because of him, this is my own hang up. I always felt like I didn't want to bug him. You know what I mean? I don't want to bug Mike. Everyone always was like, Mike, hey, Mike, he told me a story about a bass player that toured with them in an opening band. And that the guy was like asking him for money years later. And I was like, ish. So I always took it like, I don't want to bug the guy. You know what I mean? Not that he's ever put that air off at me. I'm such a fan of his and I'm so look up to him. His vocals, his playing, who he is as a person. He's been married to the same gal since he was high school or whatever they were, youngsters, great family man. And I've always looked up to that. That's something I've definitely, outside of rock and roll, he has influenced me on. You know what I mean? He's laid that foundation to be a good family man. I didn't have that as a kid. My parents are still married, but they were very young and going through their own thing. And they're awesome. But I didn't have a lot of positive. I mean, my dad and I are great friends and he's killer and he was a great role model, but I didn't have a lot of like that as a kid because you're around a lot of your friends are divorced and their parents are, whatever. But so Mike always kind of as a kid, I looked up to that as well. So yeah, I love those guys. He's a good dude. Yeah. Very humbled by his presence.
Legend for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Robbie, I'm going to let you go, man. I've loved chatting with you, dude.
I told you I talk a lot. You get me on one subject, I will run for a week.
Makes my job a lot easier.
Awesome.
No, I've loved it, dude. I've loved it.
Cool, man. Cool.
Very, very cool to connect and hear your story.
Anytime. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Top bloke, absolute top bloke, and a real touch point of the infamous and legendary Hollywood hard rock scene right there. Thank you, Robbie Crane, for sharing so many great stories and memories with us all here on the Straight to Video podcast. If you want to keep in touch and find out more about Robbie's future shows, then visit blackstarriders.com for all the latest tour dates and music releases. And also make sure you search YouTube for that clip of the Vince Neil Band at the MTV Movie Awards. It's kind of cool to watch that after hearing Robbie's story about it all. For more straight-to-video fun, there's over 100 episodes available to listen to over at stvpod.com, along with music, videos and merch, or you can find the show on pretty much every podcast platform out there. If you can please make sure to follow the show wherever you listen so not to miss out on any episodes, and if you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider leaving a quick review, because you can do them on there. It'll only take a minute or two, and stuff like that really makes a difference. So that's all for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to talking to you all again real soon.